The moment I opened my eyes after the heart surgery, I knew something was wrong, not because of the pain in my chest or the beeping of the heart monitor in my ear, but because I felt like I was waking up in a world where my family had already considered me dead. My name is Michael, and I'm 62 years old. I've worked as a power lineman all my life, saving every penny to buy a small house, putting aside some money for my old age. I've always believed that no matter how hard life was, at least my family would never betray me. But when I woke up from a coma after 9 days, the first thing I noticed was that my children were not there. No Evan, no Lisa, just a nurse who looked at me with a strange, worried look. I asked where my family was, and she just said, "They must be busy. They'll come." I knew she was lying. Evan was never absent when I was in the hospital, and now, when I had just escaped death, they didn't bother to show up. When I asked to call, my hands were shaking so much I couldn't dial. Evan picked up, and the first thing I heard was his voice. Panicked. Not happy that I was alive, but confused that I was still breathing. He said a few words and hung up so quickly that I didn't know what was going on. That's when the doubt began to grip my still aching chest. 3 days later, the nurse returned and said softly, as if afraid someone would hear, "Mr. Michael, I think you should check your assets." I frowned and asked her what she meant. Her eyes were sad and full of sympathy. She said, "Your 2 children came here last week before you woke up. They asked the doctor if you were going to make it. And after the doctor said your chances were low, they met the lawyer in the hallway." My newly operated heart felt like it was being squeezed again. A lawyer? About my assets? When I thought I was going to die? The nurse also said they were asking about transferring the house title and bank accounts, in case he didn't make it. I lay there, tears streaming into my pillow. Not from pain, from despair. I believed them. I had believed them for 30 years. 2 weeks later, when I was well enough to leave the hospital, I returned home, the place I thought I still belonged. But my name was no longer on the mailbox. Instead, it read, Evan and Madison Miller. I stood frozen. When I pushed open the door, Evan emerged from the kitchen, his face pale when he saw me. "What is this? This is your house," I asked bluntly. Evan took a deep breath and said something I'll never forget. "Dad, you were supposed to die." I had to hold onto the wall to keep from falling. He continued, trying to keep his voice steady. "We transferred the house to my name, and our savings. We had to do this to make sure everything was safe. You can't just lie there." "Wait, for what?" I asked. Evan looked straight at me and said, "Wait, Dad. Died." My daughter Lisa stepped out, avoiding my gaze. She only said, "We're sorry, but the papers are signed. You're no longer on any of the assets." I asked them, "So where do you live?" Lisa looked down at the ground. "There's a nursing home nearby." I roared, "I'm alive!" But they were silent. The silence was more cruel than any words. I walked out of the house I had built with my own hands, feeling as if I had been ripped from my life, as if I had become an uninvited guest in my own family. That night, I sat alone in the old car parked in front of the house. Outside, the wind was cold. Inside, there was a pain that no doctor could cure. I had survived the heart surgery. But if I had not taken back the life they had stolen, I might still be dead, except my heart was still beating. I sat in the old car until almost midnight, watching the lights of the house that used to be mine. Every time the living room light came on, every laugh from inside made my chest ache like someone was squeezing it. I tried to tell myself it was just a misunderstanding, just to talk a little more, just to ask them to look at me as a father. But my mind whispered, "Michael, you're not in their lives anymore." As I was about to start the car and leave, the front door opened and Madison, Evan's wife, stepped out with a trash bag. She saw me. Her face paled for a second, then she quickly went back inside. About a minute later, Evan came out with her. He looked at me like I was a ghost from the cemetery. I rolled down the window. "Evan, come out here and talk to Dad." But he crossed his arms, standing on the doorstep, keeping his distance as if I were infecting him. "Dad, I think you should go home. This isn't something you can change." I tried to keep my voice calm, but my throat felt tight. I'm not asking for anything. Just give me back the house papers, the bank accounts, everything I've worked so hard for." Evan looked at Madison and said, "Dad, you don't understand. If you die, everything will be so complicated. We're just making things easier for the family." I laughed. But it was a painful laugh. "What about you not dying? Does it mess up your plans?" Evan's face hardened. "You're not being fair to us. When you went into the hospital, we both thought you were going. We were prepared. We had a plan. And now you're back. That's not going to change." I opened the car door and stood in the light. "What do you mean?" Evan said bluntly. "You can't move in here. This house is ours, and we can't support you." I choked. Each word felt like a knife to my heart. "I told you you were my hero." Evan narrowed his eyes, his voice colder than I'd ever heard him. "I'm a grown man, Dad. Heroes don't lie unconscious in hospitals and leave their children to pay the price." I looked down at my chest, where the long incision still throbbed, and realized they saw nothing but burden. I turned and walked toward the car. But as I opened the door, I heard Madison whisper, "I told you, they should have let the doctor take the tube out." I froze. Evan tugged at her elbow. "Shh! I told you not to say it." I turned my head slowly. "What did you two say?" They both froze like statues. Evan quickly said, "No, nothing, Dad. Go to sleep." But their eyes said it all. They had discussed letting the doctor take the tube out, which meant letting me die. I was shaking, not from the cold, but from the anger that flared deep in my bones. I got in the car and drove away without looking back, because I knew if I did, I'd collapse right in front of my house. I didn't know where I was going. It wasn't until I pulled into an empty convenience store parking lot that I realized I was crying. A 62-year-old man, his heart stitched together, crying like a child who had lost his mother. I looked in the rearview mirror. My face had aged decades, my eyes were red, my hair was messy, my skin was gray from the medication. "Michael, what do you have left?" I asked myself. No home, no money, no family, no one to call. I leaned my head against the steering wheel and let the tears fall. But then, a glimmer of a thought appeared, small as a spark in the night, but a spark nonetheless. "They thought you would die, thought you were too weak to fight back, thought you would disappear." A sharp breath escaped my mouth. "But you're alive, Michael." I sat up straight. For the first time since the surgery, I felt clear. I remembered the only person who had warned me, the nurse in the hospital. She had seen something, heard something. She was the only starting point I had. I drove toward the hospital, my heart pounding, but not from pain, but from something waking up inside me, not fear, not despair, but something that had been dormant for too long, the instinct to survive. When I got to the hospital, I looked for the nurse named Hannah. She recognized me immediately, her eyes wide. "Michael, my God, why haven't you been back to my house?" I said. "Hannah, I need to know everything. What you heard, what they did." Hannah looked around, then pulled me into the small staff break room. She whispered, "You didn't hear it from me, but your two children asked the doctor if it was legally acceptable to remove the ventilator if the family requested it. When the doctor said no, they asked about transferring assets. They even argued because the lawyer said they would have to wait 3 days to see if you would wake up." I sat down in the chair, my hands shaking. "Thank you for telling the truth." Hannah put her hand on my shoulder, her voice serious. "They didn't think you would wake up, but now you are. You have to protect yourself." I nodded. "Hannah, can I ask you a favor?" She looked at me worriedly. "Of course." I took a deep breath. "I need to see the medical records, the times they arrived, the notes the doctor wrote. I need proof." Hannah bit her lip. "If they find out, I could be in trouble." I looked at her, eyes like someone cornered. "You're the only one I can trust." After a few seconds of silence, Hannah stood up, locked the door, and opened the drawer. "Okay, but you have to take a picture." She handed me a copy of the doctor's notes, and the first thing I saw in the cold writing was survival instinct. When I got to the hospital, I looked for a nurse named Hannah. She recognized me immediately, her eyes wide. "Mr. Michael, oh my God, why haven't you been back to my house? I said, Hannah, I need to know everything. What you heard, what they did. Hannah looked around, then pulled me into the small staff break room. She whispered, You didn't hear it from me, but your two children asked the doctor if removing the breathing tube was legally acceptable if the family requested it. When the doctor said no, they asked about transferring assets. They even argued because the lawyers said they would have to wait 3 days to see if you would wake up. I sat down in a chair, my hands shaking. Thank you for telling the truth. Hannah put her hand on my shoulder, her voice serious. They didn't think you would wake up, but now you are. You have to protect yourself. I nodded. Hannah, can I ask you a favor? She looked at me worriedly. Of course. I took a deep breath. I need to see the medical records, the times they arrived, the notes the doctor wrote. I need proof. Hannah bit her lip. If they find out, I could be in trouble. I looked at her, eyes like someone cornered. You're the only one I can trust. After a few seconds of silence, Hannah stood up, locked the door, and opened the drawer. Okay, but you have to take a picture. She handed me a copy of the doctor's notes, and the first thing I saw in the cold writing was survival instinct. When I got to the hospital, I looked for a nurse named Hannah. She recognized me immediately, her eyes wide. Mr. Michael, oh my God, why haven't you been back to my house? I said, Hannah, I need to know everything, what you heard, what they did. Hannah looked around, then pulled me into the small staff break room. She whispered, You didn't hear it from me, but your two children asked the doctor if removing the breathing tube was legally acceptable if the family requested it. When the doctor said no, they asked about transferring assets. They even argued because the lawyers said they would have to wait 3 days to see if you would wake up. I sat down in a chair, my hands shaking. Thank you for telling the truth. Hannah put her hand on my shoulder, her voice serious. They didn't think you would wake up, but now you are. You have to protect yourself. I nodded. Hannah, can I ask you a favor? She looked at me worriedly. Of course. I took a deep breath. I need to see the medical records, the times they arrived, the notes the doctor wrote. I need proof. Hannah bit her lip. If they find out, I could be in trouble. I looked at her, eyes like someone cornered. You're the only one I can trust. After a few seconds of silence, Hannah stood up, locked the door, and opened the drawer. Okay, but you have to take a picture. She handed me a copy of the doctor's notes, and the first thing I saw in the cold writing was, Family inquired about legal steps in case patient does not regain consciousness. I felt like someone had slapped me in the face, but at the same time, I was also grasping for the first time what could save me. As I walked out of the hospital, the yellow lights in the hallway ceiling were different, no longer hazy, but clear as the path I knew I had to take. My family thought I would stay quiet, thought I was weak, thought I would accept being buried alive, but I wasn't dead. And if they thought I would stay quiet, they didn't know who I was. Leaving the hospital that night, I sat in the car for a long time, the doctor's note in my lap, shaking with every breath. It contained the whole truth. My children had asked about removing the ventilator, had sought a lawyer, had prepared me to die, not out of pity, not out of fear of losing me, but to take everything I had. The evidence was right there in my hands, neat, cold, and as cruel as they had become. The wind blew through the window, so cold it made the incision in my chest hurt. I forced myself to take a deep breath. If you want to live, Michael, you have to fight. But fight with what? I had no home, no money, no place to sleep, no one on my side except a kind nurse. I sat there, watching the cars pass under the streetlights, and for the first time in my life, I understood that family is not always a safe place. Sometimes it is they who hold the knife to your back. I started the car and drove to a cheap motel where the sign flashed vacancy, as if mocking a poor, homeless old man. I rented a small room with patchy walls, a squeaky bed, and a musty smell that permeated every fiber of the blanket. But at least I had room to breathe. I went in, put my bag down, and for the first time since waking up, I closed my eyes, not because I was exhausted, but because I needed to stay awake. I turned on my phone, scrolled through my contacts. There were only 3 names I could call: Evan, Lisa, and one more, Tom, the only friend I kept in touch with. Tom was an old neighbor, used to work with me on hot summer afternoons in the garage to fix cars. We weren't as close as we used to be, but at least Tom wasn't someone who would watch me die. I pressed the call button. "Hello?" Tom's voice was hoarse and tired, but there was a familiarity that calmed my heart. "Tom, it's me, Michael." "Jesus, Mike, are you really alive? I heard you didn't make it." I smiled sadly. "Yeah, I hear my family thinks so." Tom cursed loudly. I told him everything, from the house being taken, the money being taken, to them asking the doctor about removing the breathing tube. Tom was silent for a long time, then said, "Where are you sleeping tonight?" "A motel. I'm fine." "No, you're not fine. But, okay, I respect that. So what's your plan?" Plan. Those 2 words swirled in my head. I didn't know yet. I just knew I wasn't allowed to die quietly, not allowed to disappear from my own life. I said, "Tom, I need a lawyer, a good one, someone who knows how to turn things around." Tom replied immediately, "I have one, my divorce lawyer when my wife ran off with the gym trainer. She's tough, smart, and fearless." I laughed for the first time in days. Just the kind of person I need. Tom picked me up the next morning. When he saw me come out of the motel in my old thin coat, he looked at me for a long moment, his eyes showing a pity I had never allowed anyone to see. He said nothing, just squeezed my shoulder, enough to let me know I wasn't completely alone. We went to Sandra Keller's law office, a woman in her 50s with razor-sharp eyes. She looked me up and down and asked bluntly, "What do you want?" I looked at her, my voice firm. "I want my life back." I told her the story. Sandra sat and listened, not interrupting, just taking notes. When Evan said, "Dad, you were supposed to die," she raised her head. "Do you have a recording?" I shook my head. "I couldn't even stand." Sandra nodded slightly. "It's okay. I need 3 things. The papers you suspect they signed while you were in a coma, your medical records, and proof that you were taken advantage of." I handed her the doctor's note Hannah had given her. Sandra read it carefully and took a deep breath. "This is valuable. Not much, but enough to open the door." "What about my house papers?" I asked. She raised her eyebrows slightly. "If they transfer the house when you are not in a state of mind to consent, I can sue to nullify the transaction." My heart pounded. "Really?" Sandra narrowed her eyes. "As long as you don't give up as easily as they think." Tom laughed, patting my shoulder. "Mike, give up. I've never seen this old man give up anything in his life." Sandra folded the file and said, "Step 1. You have to become a legitimate threat. What does that mean?" I swallowed. "What does that mean?" "It means," she said slowly, "you have to go back to that house, but not to beg, to let them know you're not dead, and not to be silent." The thought of going back to the place that had broken my heart made my skin crawl, but I knew she was right. I had to show Evan and Lisa that their worst nightmare had returned, and this time, I didn't go with a weak heart after surgery, but with the determination of someone who knew she'd lost too much. Tom drove me back to the motel. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, looking at my pale face, my eyes sunken from lack of sleep, the surgical scar clearly visible under my shirt. I put my hand on my heart and said to myself, "You've died once, Michael. You have nothing left to lose." I called Sandra. "When do we start?" She replied, "Tonight." I froze. "So soon?" "The longer you wait, the more they'll consolidate the paperwork. Let them panic." I took a deep breath. "Okay, I'm ready." But honestly, I wasn't ready at all. I just knew I had to. That evening, I drove back down the road to my house. But this time, I didn't come like a lost old man. I came like a man who knew he was being hunted. And now, I was hunting again. The lights in the windows spilled out. I saw Evan's shadow pass by, then Lisa's. They laughed. They ate. The house I'd built with my sweat and tears was serving dinner to the people who had plotted my death. I stopped the car, turned off the engine, and got out. Step by step, I walked toward the door like a ghost from hell, and I knew this was just the beginning, because there was one thing they didn't know. I knew all their plans, and I had my own plans. I walked into my old house around 6 in the evening. The setting sun crept through the faded wooden windows, casting a deep orange on the floor, the color I loved because Sarah loved it. Looking back, it felt like I just walked into a memorial service for my own life. The smell in the house was no longer pine and my morning coffee. It was cheap air freshener, abuse. I heard glasses clinking from the kitchen, like a small party. They were still celebrating the day I disappeared, and I thought, perfect. Their celebration would be my celebration. I stood there for a few seconds, my hand on the doorframe, my heart shaking and slowing like a thread still in my heart. Calm down, John. Take a deep breath. You've been preparing for the past 2 months. From the kitchen came a painfully familiar laugh. I don't think his father will ever come back, Sarah said, her voice as light as if she were talking about an old discarded chair. Even if he comes back, Mark replied, this house is ours now. He has nothing left. I closed my eyes, inhaled, exhaled. I didn't let the anger choke my lungs. Today was not the day to explode. Today was a celebration, and they deserved it. I put my bag down, adjusted my shirt, and pushed open the kitchen door. No one heard me enter. They were pouring themselves wine, red wine glasses filled to the brim. Sarah turned around first. Her glass crashed to the tile floor, shattering loudly. Mark stood frozen. Dad? What are you doing here? I stood up straight, strangely calm. Yes, it's Dad. Is this celebration big enough to invite me? Sarah stepped back, her hands shaking as if she had seen a ghost. Perhaps in their eyes, I really was a ghost. John, what are you? Awake, well, and very alert, I said, each word weighing like stone. I pulled out a chair and sat down at the table as if this were still my home, because, truthfully, it still was. Sit down. We have a ceremony to perform. Sarah and Mark looked at each other, not moving. I won't repeat myself, I said, my voice sharp as a knife. Sit. They reluctantly pulled up chairs, eyes glancing at each other in panic. I opened the bag on the table. It wasn't a knife, nor was it legal papers, as they'd expected. I took out my family photo album, the only thing I'd brought with me on the journey home. Mark saw it, and his lips moved, as if he wanted to say something, but then stopped. I turned to the first page. Sarah, 25, standing beside me at our wedding. Mark, 6, with his arms around my neck, smiling toothlessly. Our last fishing trip, when Mark was 17, the last time he called me Dad. I turned the album toward them. Today's ceremony, I said, is to bury the old family, and to see which of you still wants one last chance. Sarah chuckled defensively, steeling herself. You think an album will change anything? I looked deep into her eyes. No, but the truth would change a lot. Mark swallowed. Dad, I don't know about money. Shut up, Sarah said sharply. Don't let him control. Control? I chuckled. Sarah, I've lost everything. The only ones in control here are you two. The air was thick. No one spoke. Only the ticking of the clock on the wall seemed to mark each second as the truth drew closer. I put the album down. Today's ceremony, I said slowly, is for you two to tell the truth. Voluntarily, without coercion. I want to hear clearly why. You had every opportunity to talk to me before taking everything, so why choose the most despicable way? Sarah started to argue, but I held up my hand. No beating around the bush, no blaming, just the facts. Mark clenched his fists. I thought Dad wasn't going to survive the surgery. Mom said. Sarah kicked its leg hard. None of your business? I slammed my hand on the table. The sound startled us both. Let it talk, Mark gasped, then spoke quickly as if afraid of losing the opportunity. I'm afraid of losing everything. I don't want to live in poverty. Sarah said, Sarah said Dad was going to change the will, that Dad wanted to sell the house and leave it all to a heart disease charity. I was stunned. I never said that. I know, Mark shouted. But I believed. I really believed. I turned to Sarah, the only one who was still trying to act calm, but her eyes were red. And you? Why do you say so? She looked at me for a few seconds, as if she was about to lie, then let out a long sentence. Because you love them more than me. All your life, you only care about Mark and work. Where am I in this family? I am always the one who plays second fiddle. And when you almost died, I realized I had nothing left of my own. She slapped her hand against her chest. This house isn't even mine. I'm just taking back what I think I deserve. I sat silently, not angry, not shouting, just tired. Turns out, everything had been broken for a long time. I just didn't see it. I gathered the photos and closed the album. The ceremony is over, I said. Sarah sneered. That's it? You think you can scare us with these old stories? You have no house, no money, no lawyer. You have nothing. I stood up and put on my coat. You're wrong. I have something important. Self-respect? Sarah scoffed. No, I replied. I have the truth, and in a few days, the whole country will have it too. They both looked up. What truth? I smiled a small smile, one Mark hadn't seen since he was a child. Tomorrow, I said, is the day you'll learn what it means to underestimate an old man who seems to be dying. I walked out of the house as their panic echoed behind me, but I didn't turn back. The ceremony was over. Now came the part they never expected. That evening, I drove my cheap rental car to the small hotel in the suburbs. The rain pattered on the tin roof, creating a rhythm as steady as my newly sewn heart, slow, heavy, but still trying to live. I sat down on my bed, opened my laptop, and looked at the pile of documents I had been collecting for 2 months. Copies of the house transfer papers, the deleted bank statements, the recording of Sarah's familiar doctor lying about my condition. It all lined up in a disgusting picture. This isn't about money anymore. This is about right and wrong that they thought I would never be strong enough to fight for. I played the recording of tonight's conversation. Sarah's voice echoed in the room. This house isn't even mine. I'm just taking back what I deserve. I stopped, silent for a few seconds. My God. I had slept with this woman for more than 20 years. My phone rang. It was Ethan, the young lawyer I'd met at the Free Legal Center. A guy about 28 with sharp eyes and a straight-as-steel personality. Everything going well tonight, John? Ethan asked. I have what you need. I sent the recording and all the documents. Ethan replied almost immediately. Enough to prosecute them both for property fraud and medical malpractice. We'll file the papers tomorrow morning. I let out a small breath. Part of me still wants to believe they did it out of panic, out of fear. John, Ethan said, his voice sincere. Fear doesn't make you rob the house of someone who just escaped death. I was silent. Yes. There are truths that are painful, but very clear. The next morning, I walked into the town hall in my old coat and scuffed shoes. Ethan walked beside me, clutching a folder as thick as a Bible. We filed the papers. We signed them. We left the courthouse. Everything happened so fast that I was almost stunned. And so, it began. As soon as we got outside, Ethan said, I sent everything to the police and the prosecutor's office, and, John, there's one more thing. His face was so serious that I felt a chill down my spine. What? I think people should know the truth sooner. I sent the documents to an investigative reporter from a local news channel. He wants to interview you. I stood still. What? Ethan looked me straight in the eye. You were a firefighter for 30 years. You saved lives. You protected this community. Now the community will protect you. This is not just a family story. This is a warning to the thousands of people who are treated unfairly when they are sick. I smiled softly, but my voice trembled. I'm just an old man who just had heart surgery. No, Ethan replied. You're an ordinary American who was betrayed, and that's a story everyone will hear. That afternoon, I stood in the cemetery looking at my father's grave. He had died long ago, a tough man, but full of integrity. I placed my hand on the cold stone. "Dad," I said softly, "I will do the right thing. Not because I hate them, but because I have to protect myself, like you always taught me." The wind blew hard. Dry leaves swirled under my feet like confetti at an unfinished ceremony. The phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. "If you don't stop, you will regret it." I stared at the screen. A second message came. "You don't know who you're messing with?" I frowned. This wasn't Sarah. This wasn't Mark. His tone was too cold and too professional. Third message. "Last time, withdraw the lawsuit." I raised my head. So, there was someone else in this? Someone I had never seen before? I looked around, but the cemetery had only me and a few strangers walking in the distance. I gripped the phone tightly. "Fine," I muttered. "If someone wants to play dirty, they picked the wrong old man." That evening, Sarah called me. I didn't pick up. She called again. I still didn't pick up. Finally, Mark texted, "Dad, the police are here. Things are bad. Dad, can you see me?" I typed back, "Tomorrow, 9 a.m., Old Park by the Lake, alone." Mark replied, "I swear I went alone." I stared at the message for a long time. Maybe some part of him wasn't dead, but I couldn't believe any of it. The next morning, meeting at the park. I arrived first. I sat on the wooden bench where I used to read the newspaper when Mark was a kid. A cold wind blew across the lake, making silver streaks on the surface. Mark appeared, staggering like someone who hadn't slept all night. "Dad," it said hoarsely. I didn't think it would turn out like this." I did not answer. Mark sat down next to me, keeping a distance as if afraid I would disappear again. "Dad," he said softly, "there's one thing you don't know." I turned my head to look at it. Mark swallowed. "Taking the house. It wasn't my idea or yours. We weren't the only ones involved." A chill ran down my spine. "Who?" Mark looked at me as if he wanted to say something but was trembling with fear. I was forced." "Who forced?" He turned his face away from my eyes, but his lips were still trembling. "A person Dad once trusted very much, and that person is still following Dad." The wind blew cold. I felt like my heart dropped to the bottom of the lake. "Who?" I repeated, this time my voice low and heavy as steel. Mark replied, but that answer would turn everything in my life upside down. The cold wind from the lake hit me as Mark bowed his head, his hands shaking uncontrollably. Part of me still wanted to believe he was just trying to get away with it, but in his eyes, I didn't see deception. I saw fear. Fear so strong that his spine felt like it was about to snap. "Mark," I said slowly, "tell me, who is behind this?" He swallowed hard. "It's Uncle David." I was stunned. David, my brother. The man who lived in my house for 3 years after the divorce. The man I helped pay for his hospital bills when he was being treated for depression. The man I defended against a gambling lawsuit. I blinked a few times. "Dad, you think I'm kidding?" Mark said, his voice choking. "It was Uncle David who told me to sign the transfer papers. He said if I didn't, he would tell my family what happened." "What happened in the past?" I asked. Mark shook his head, tears falling. "He told me to be quiet, or he would destroy Dad too." I took my son's shoulder and squeezed it gently. "Mark, look at me." He raised his head, his eyes red. "What's wrong? Tell me." There was a long, suffocating silence. Then Mark whispered, "Uncle David is the one who forged Dad's bank documents years ago. The withdrawals didn't start when Dad was in the hospital. They started a long time ago. Mom, she knew, but he had a hold on Mom. It felt like someone had punched me in the chest, right where my heart was still covered in stitches. Every breath felt like it was on fire. David? My brother?" Mark continued, his voice shaking. "He said Dad owed me, that this house was supposed to be yours. I didn't understand, but Mom did. And when Dad was hospitalized, he said this was his chance to get back what was his family. I stood up. No tears fell, but my whole body was cold. Maybe because the truth is too big, too dirty, too unbelievable. Mark took my hand. Dad, I'm sorry. I was stupid. I was a coward. I let them lead me. But you have to watch out. He doesn't want you alive. He wants you gone. What do you mean? I asked, my voice almost growling. Mark looked down. You think the botched heart surgery was an accident? My body was numb. My fingers were cold. Mark, I moved closer to him. Tell me now, he replied, each word like a knife. He bribed the doctor. He wanted Dad to die. I stepped back, not because I was afraid, but because the whole world around me had suddenly become distorted. David, my brother, wants me dead? That evening, I didn't go back to the hotel. I drove straight to the old cabin David lived in, the one I'd helped pay off so the bank wouldn't repossess it. I banged on the door so hard that it almost came off its hinges. David opened the door, still looking the same, loose sweater, unshaven chin, beer can in hand. But when he saw me, the color drained from his face. John, it stammered, when did you come back? Good question, I said, walking straight into the house. But a better question is, when did you plan to kill me? The beer can fell from David's hand. What are you talking about? Who told you? Mark, I replied. And I know he's not smart enough to come up with a story like that. David took a deep breath. You misunderstood. Things aren't what you think. I was so angry I didn't want to hear a word of excuses. I pressured Sarah. I pressured Mark. I took your money. I paid some bastard doctor to let you die on the operating table. David put his hands on the table, trying to calm himself. John, you don't know the whole story. You don't know. I know enough, David sighed. You want the truth? Fine. But it will ruin your image of this family. I crossed my arms. What else do you want to destroy? David looked at me strangely for a long time. Then he said something that made me freeze. Sarah didn't start this. It was your mother. I narrowed my eyes. Don't lie. No, David replied, his voice low. Before Mom died, she told me that you owed the family, that this house was supposed to be left to you, not me. You were the one who changed her will without telling anyone. My heart was pounding. That was something no one had ever said before. And I didn't know how to react. What did you say? David stepped closer. Mom just trusted me, but she never wanted to leave me sole control of the estate. I changed the will because I thought it was the right thing to do, but to others, it looked like I was taking something that didn't belong to me. I was stunned. I remembered my mother's dying days. I remembered our private conversations, but she had never mentioned leaving a will to David. Why? I asked. Did you wait until now to tell me? David smiled wearily. Because I tried to put up with it, tried to believe you would share, tried to believe you would give me a chance. But then you got married, you had Mark, you had a steady job, and I choose gambling, I interrupted. David chuckled. Yeah, I was broken. I messed up. But when you went to the hospital, Sarah came to me, and everything exploded. The air was suffocating. I whispered, You want to kill me just for a house? David looked at me, his eyes red. No, I want you to understand the feeling of being abandoned. I was silent. I didn't know whether to be angry or to feel sorry. A week later, police get involved. Sarah was arrested for property fraud. The doctor was suspended and investigated. David was handcuffed in silence. Mark pleaded guilty to cooperating with the investigation and received a reduced sentence. I stood in the courthouse hallway, watching them being led away. There was no joy, just exhaustion. Ethan put his hand on my shoulder. You did the right thing, you saved yourself, and maybe you saved them too. I looked out the large glass doors. The sunlight streamed down onto the stone floor like a golden silk ribbon, something I hadn't seen as beautiful in months. "I don't want revenge," I said. "I just want the truth told." 2 months later, I moved to a small house near the sea. My heart is better. My mind, too. One afternoon, while I was drinking coffee and watching the ocean waves, there was a knock on the door. I opened the door. Mark was standing there, thinner, more mature, and his eyes weren't scared anymore. "Dad," he said softly, "I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I'd like to start over, if you'll let me." I looked at my son for a long time, then I opened the door wider. "Come in, child." It walked in, and for the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't alone. The final twist. As Mark sat down at the table, I poured him a glass of water. He placed the envelope on the table. "What is this?" I asked. Mark said, "I think you should see it. This is a letter from Grandma, the one Uncle David has been hiding from you." I opened the envelope. Inside was old, shaky handwriting. It was my mother's. "Dear John, if you are reading this letter, I am no longer in this world. I want you to know the truth. I left everything to you not because you were the best, but because you are the only one with the heart of a protector. As for David, I love him, but he is not strong enough to protect anything. If you see him going astray, please help him. But if he hurts you, protect yourself, because I know he will be jealous of you all his life. I believe in you. Mom." I read each word slowly. When I reached the last line, my hand was shaking. "Where did you find it?" I asked hoarsely. Mark replied, "In my cupboard. I hid it for years. If Dad had known the truth sooner, things would have been different." I folded the letter. My heart ached and felt light. I looked out to sea, the wind blowing in my face, the salt taste on my lips. I whispered, "I don't know how much I need this letter." Mark put his hand on my shoulder. "Dad, can we start over?" I turned, smiled. "We'll start over, with the truth." The sea breeze blew strong, carrying a chill. But this time, I felt warm. My story is not about loss. It is not about revenge. It is about a heart sewn back together that finds a way to love again.